So thank you all for coming to our second Learning Bytes session. Today we're going to be looking at the property lifecycle, which is essentially, does your data get worse with every change in this lifecycle? So looking at your controls of how you manage your information, do you have them adequately specified, controlled, managed, resourced? So quote from Lovelock, nature favours those organisms which leave their environment in a better shape than they found for their progeny to survive. Which essentially means you come in, you do your work to make your data and your information better, so that the next person who comes into your role should be in an even better position. So rather than having all your information getting worse and worse, you put the controls and resources in place to make sure that you're continually improving your information and your controls of your information. So, Learning Byte overview, we're going to look at what the property lifecycle is. Why did your data get worse? So really understanding the causes behind this. I'm going to have a worked example looking at the costings. So we make it very easy for you to transfer this back to your own organisation. You literally take the slides, slot in your own numbers, and you can have your own kind of business case for we need to look at this, or perhaps we don't need to look at this. And what can be done about this? So it's all well and good showing a costed example of this is a problem. What are the rational steps that you can take to manage this? So, quick exercise just as we start. So, hypothetically, your organisation wants to buy land with a property on it and wants to demolish and build flats. So imagine you just bought a fire station, a police station, a warehouse. You want to demolish that, you want to build some social housing, possibly some shared ownership or private flats. And when do you start looking to capture your data? So we've got various different points in the process. What I'd like you to do is put your hands up when you think you need to start capturing the data. So, pre-purchase, site purchase, approved design. If anyone doesn't know what these terms mean, just shout out and I'll explain them. Planning permission granted, start on site, practical completion, first sale letting, and after the defects liability period. Now I appreciate this is quite development new build heavy, so if you're not as familiar with that, I'll explain it a little bit more now. So pre-purchase, you haven't actually got the asset or any responsibility at that stage. You don't necessarily need to capture that information, but as soon as you have a legal ownership of that site, you start to have responsibilities to ensure, to manage, to make sure it's on your assets and liability register. You need to definitely capture data at purchase. Then throughout these, you may or may not want to hold them. Things like practical completion, you've physically got different buildings at the end of the build process. You'll definitely want to capture that. First sale letting, that's when new people are coming in. So you want to capture those people processes. And after the defects liabilities period, that's generally a year to 18 months after you've had this handover from the developer into becoming business as usual. So usually you want to have a switch over kind of data capture mechanism there. But this is just to get you thinking around what are the different changes that your business would have with your properties and your people, and that you should be looking at to control your information. Okay, this is a very high level property life cycle. I could spend the full 30 minutes and much more looking at all the different aspects. There are dozens and dozens of different processes which fall into the property life cycle. So all the ones I just mentioned there, all the way through to essentially demolishing or selling the properties at the end, and all the changes in the middle. So if you look at it, buying new properties, new people coming in, so building new homes, buying new homes, building blocks of flats, buying blocks of flats, stock transfers, anything coming into your business, new people and new homes are the endpoints of your property life cycle. Then you look at your changes, so the changes to a home, so new roofs, new kitchens, new bathrooms, boilers. Generally you're looking more at replacements rather than repairs. You're looking at proper substantial changes that have happened to your properties. You might have ownership changes as well, a tenant becoming a leaseholder. You could decide whether you want that under the home or the customer side. So in terms of the customers, you have new babies coming in, so there's a household change. People getting married, so another household change. There could be divorce or separation, so that's another household change. It could be antisocial behaviour. That's another potential household change which you want to manage. And then things like rent arrears, changes to people's financial situations, they have new employment, whether you want to capture that information. These are all points where you can have a data capture behind You just need to think, what is the business value of doing that? What is the return on investment for having this particular data capture? Are we using this information to drive our business and our decisions? And in terms of the out, I'll just flip the pound sign round, but essentially you're selling the properties, people are moving out, people are abandoning their properties, they might surrender their tenancies, they might sell their lease and become changed, you might demolish and regenerate a whole scheme of flats, you might do various changes there. But just to give you the feel that these are the three different areas, in, change and out, the three kind of main parts of the property lifecycle we're looking at. Now it's all around data controls. So you've got four types of controls we're going to look at. We've got incomplete controls, ineffective controls, controls which are not mandated, and controls which are not monitored. So we're going to go into a bit more about what all of those means. But a quote from someone that people don't really like, but it's quite a good quote, and I couldn't find someone else that said something similar. You're forced to have the best data capture, the best information when you have goods in fact hundreds of factories around the world. And the question is, where is everything and how do you bring it all together? Now, this is a global factories kind of question, but think about your portfolios, how they're spread across lots of boroughs, lots of areas of England. You have quite a lot of complexity in there. You have different care and support arrangements, you have different housing management responsibilities, you've got different management agents coming in to manage your properties. So you have a huge amount of complexity. And how are you going to make sure you get the best service for your customers, the best value from the service? And it's around managing your data, capturing your data effectively. So the first part we looked at, incomplete controls. Now, might sound scary, but the first thing you're always going to get is that core piece of information that you definitely need for that piece to work. So if it's a new property, for example, you're always going to get rental details because you're going to get the money coming in, people in finance are going to mandate that to happen, and that's going to work. It's the peripheral aspects, or the things that you don't immediately need, there's nobody shouting or jumping up and down for, that you're at risk at. So you might get home addresses and when the property is ready to let for a new build, but you might not understand exactly how the ownership work. Is there a Section 106 agreement on site? Does the developer retain the freehold and you've just got the head lease? Property and associate information, is it a flat roof, is it a pitched roof, how tall is it? And that might sound strange, but the more information you have, the more you can be data driven, the more you can make clever decisions. So in terms of a pitched or flat roof, you might think, well, that's pretty inconsequential, but a different perspective might be, if it's a flat roof, you can put an extra floor on that, so there's a potential asset which is underutilised. Or if it's a flat roof again, there's a potential for solar panels. There's lots of things you can do with the information, you just need to have it in place and make sure you are managing it through the life cycle. So again, ineffective controls. So this is about perception. It doesn't mean the control is like this, but people think it is like this. So it's perceived to be too difficult. I'm not going to touch that. It's too hard. I can't do it. I'm not interested. Too time consuming. I spend hours and hours of my day keying in these pieces of information. Nobody ever uses it. It's just taking too long. Not my job. Well, I've never done this before. It's them. And then rather than getting this information, what you have is people pointing at others, and you never really get the information that you need. So that really makes it challenging to get the information that you need. So if control is perceived to be too difficult, it won't be followed. And the other thing that could happen is the control could be gamed. That's where you see reoccurrence, such as 1st of January 1900 as a birth date for a large majority of customers. You have prefer not to say as a default option for lots of questions you might ask, because the system will allow you to do that. People don't really buy into the fact that you need this information to run your business, or maybe you don't. But if you think about those kind of reoccurrences as a way of identifying whether it's been gamed, and inconsistency is another one. A bungalow with 5 stories, perhaps a bit of an inconsistency, but you can start understanding the inconsistencies you have, and those are all symptoms that your information is being gamed and your control is not being effective. So, not mandated. Now, this is around having the senior leadership backing you up. Now, I've heard time and time again from senior leaders that data's never the top priority. It's not necessarily the bottom priority, but it's middle to high. but it's never that burning platform. And that's because data is a longer term investment and approach to managing your business. It's not a quick fix. It takes a long time to make sure you get your controls in place and make sure you have all the information to back up being data driven. It's kind of a whole mindset change which you need to have. So senior leadership need to support data management with resources. So that's physical people doing the work, basically saying this is going to happen. The focus, so if these people are doing the work, they need to be given the time, the energy to actually do the work rather than pulled left, right and centre, otherwise they won't be able to achieve it. And positive language, if you're constantly rubbishing that managing data is not important, lo and behold, it will become not important. Data controls should be fully integrated to business processes. So we looked at the new build process. All of those were physical or planning aspects which happen during that process. You don't want something completely new to the side of that where you manage your information. It should physically be entwined with that business process. Otherwise, it's less likely to be followed. You want to make it as easy as possible for your information to get captured at the right time. And data management responsibilities should form part of role responsibilities. So that's things like people have responsibility as part of the process to put the data in. It's in their job descriptions. Those kind of HR kind of governance aspects, you want to make sure it's adequately covered. And finally, last but not least, not monitoring these controls and your information. So the effectiveness and efficiency of data controls should be transparent for monitoring purpose. What that means is you want to know what your current state of play is. Your information should all be very easy to get to, and you should understand what combinations of information do you need to say that this is good, this is bad. And that should be really clear from everyone to understand our data is this good, this bad, in these different areas. Without a monitoring system, the organisation cannot be confident in its data, and you cannot be data-driven in your decision making. So things like a comprehensive self-service cannot effectively happen if you do not have confidence in your data, because your data is your prerequisite to having a good self-service mechanism. Okie-doke. So here's the worked example I mentioned. So the plan is for you to slot in your own information into this, and hopefully it enables you to generate your own business case if you are interested in this. So we're looking at Pseudo Homes. Pseudo Homes has 10,000 homes and 30,000 customers. It has an ambitious program of developments, and every year it's building 500 new homes, which is 1,500 customers. To fund this program, it sells or disposes of 200 homes, which is about 600 customers. It has 10% changes through its homes and its customers, just through the new berths, the new kitchens, etc. that I mentioned before. So, in terms of the numbers, 10,000, 30,000, we've got various changes coming through. So basically it's a growing organisation, it's got more properties, got more people, but there's quite a high volume of change. You're looking at about 20-ish%, slightly more than 20% of the changes. Now, data numbers. So this isn't exact, this is just a very rough scenario for easy maths. 100 pieces of data for property, so things like the roofs, the kitchen types, all the models, etc. that you have in the property. People, 20 pieces of information, so less around the people, perhaps you don't have as much. So in terms of the total property data, 10,000 homes, 100 pieces of data, 1 million pieces in total. Total people, 600,000 pieces of data. Simple maths. Now this isn't at all true, but let's say it's all worth £1 each. So things like responsive repairs, whether or not you should go out and repair that property, it's obviously going to be worth more. Whether you own that property, how you own that property is going to be worth more. Perhaps the paint colour of the roof will be very low in value, but it's just kind of £1 each, just for simple maths. Okay, so I was going to put a few more slides in to basically build along to this, but I thought perhaps people wouldn't be as interested. It might take a bit longer, and if this example's not particularly appetising, it might not go down so well. So what this is a look at 1, 3 and 5 years along the time scale of this organisation, which is growing, but it's also people are leaving the organisation, homes are being sold or demolished, and just looking at what the effect is of the different levels of control. So We've got controls are none, poor or excellent. So looking at the effectiveness. So having no controls, 20% effectiveness. Poor controls, 40% effectiveness. And excellent controls, 95% effectiveness. Now, fairly arbitrary, but you can get a feel for having better controls will be slightly stronger. So if we look at the homes, so what we said is this is worth £1 million worth of information that we have. So year one, if we look up here, already the organisation's grown slightly, but it's almost a fifth of the information. And you've gone from having £1 million worth of information to £8,720, and then another 2 years pass, working on the same cycle of having no controls. It's now worth what you might pay a day rate contractor, £368, and going from £1 million in 5 years to that worth. Now it's hypothetical, but think about your repairs, think about your ownership, think about all those key things which happen in your business that you really want to make sure that they work really well. This is just showing that not having this under control, you will constantly degrade, you'll have no confidence in what you have. So in terms of the percentages, 20% at year one, 2 years later it goes down to 1%, then it goes to a minimal fraction, it's even showing up as 0% there. You'll get all these slides as well. And in terms of the excellent, I'll skip the poor because obviously that's the middle level, but excellent is 95%. That's very, very good compared to the no controls. So you've almost retained all the value, but then after 5 years you've even dropped over 100,000 worth of the property information, and you go down to 77% data accuracy. Now some might say 77 pretty high, but that's showing even with excellent controls, over time it will degrade, and it's a constant approach. That's what I was trying to convey earlier. You need to constantly be putting your resources and your focus onto your data. It's not a quick fix, it's a long-term mindset change. You need to make sure you manage your information. So the customer's very similar story. Having no information, again, you drop down to £220 after 5 years. That's the company's still growing, so there are more customers, there should be more value, but it's degraded instead because you're not controlling the information. And essentially it's dropped again quite considerably on the excellent, but nowhere near as bad as having no controls or poor controls. And again, you can see 0%, 1% for 20% having no controls and 40% having poor controls. It absolutely destroys your confidence in your ability not having controls. I can tell you a little bit more about this if you have any questions, or I'll just move on.
I think this is quite a good way of looking at how cost data quality and how you degrade the value of the data. But it will be also useful to look at saying, actually, if you're in a no control zone and you try to deliver a service for the customer. So classic example of repairs, and where the call center takes a call saying, oh no, my fence panel was broken, and then it takes the contact center or the property manager, and you start involving more people just to try to work out, do we fix it or we don't fix it.
Yeah.
So that yes, no binary decision suddenly actually has involved, the argument say 5 people, which has costed about £150, £200 just to come to a yes no decision. We haven't even repaired the fence itself. So it might be worth kind of looking at in that way, because the concept of costs and the value of data, I think it's difficult for people to actually understand. And kind of, I think that's, for me, the value of £1 million for the data, again, as you kind of age it, it's still difficult to actually kind of put it in picture.
Yeah. Okay.
People say it's not a tangible, I can't see money in there, and I can't put it on my balance sheet. But how does it all kind of work out?
Well, you're absolutely right. So that's the micro kind of level. All of those instances where you're not able to self-serve, or you're not able to give your customer service centre that information at point of contact. They should be able to make those decisions straight away. Are we responsible? Are we not responsible for that repair? And this is the kind of the overall picture, which I agree is harder to kind of penetrate into that. I had thought around doing a lot more on the new build, just focusing on that scenario, but I thought I might lose everybody if they're not involved in the new build type aspect. But you're absolutely right, lots of people will get brought in. You'll ask who can read a lease, who can read a tenancy agreement to come into that. That person will have expertise, so they'll cost a bit more. And then whilst that's happening, this person has that leak happening. They have that service failure, which they're really not happy about. So it's a customer satisfaction and financial loss through that kind of indecision, and people not able to kind of say, our data's here, it's good quality, it is all what we need to have, and the system's set up to basically say, go. And that's essentially just what you need, but having the controls mean that you can say that this will happen every time. But I can do something around that. I can possibly add that into the slides afterwards. Thank you. Okay. In terms of focusing on which processes you're going to look at first, the in and out processes are likely to have the biggest volume, the biggest risk. So look at which ones are costing you the most money in terms of the business money. Look at the ones which have the greatest customer satisfaction risk. Whatever's the most important to your organisation, which ones affect it the most. So do you have a large development programme? And that's absolutely critical, so you want to make sure that you get all that information really, really well stacked up, and that's the one you're going to work on first. Stock transfers, instead of a new build program, are you looking at constantly reshaping your portfolio strategically to align to certain boroughs or certain areas, so you're quite aggressively changing how your portfolio looks? Or are you merging? That's going to be by far and above the biggest risk to your information, so that's the biggest process, and actually that's mapping all of your organisational information into one. That will become the master template, which you can just chop down into size. That will work. So find the parts in the process where data is required. So again, we looked at that scenario in the new build one, so where basically actually we'll go back to that one very quickly, and I'll just show you. Okay, so in terms of where is the information required, so not necessarily pre-purchase because you don't have any ownership of that, but you purchased a site, you need to have some degree of control from a treasury perspective. You have an ownership interest, land registry has been updated that you have this title. What is the title number for this asset? You have a property, you need to look at, is that under insurance? Is that fully covered? Do you have the boundaries on your GIS system if you're looking at GIS? Approved design, not something you might want to have covered because that's going to feed into your planning capacity for your development team, but that's essentially saying, okay, your architects have gone out to your local authority and said that's designed, that design has been approved, planning permission granted, right, you can start building. You get a time delay between that, so you might have a little kind of time stamp for that, so you have a certain amount of time. But all of these, to a greater and lesser extent, you want to have information captured. What you really want to have is probably around practical completion, because that's when you have the new physical properties coming into play. That's after all these last minute changes to the final designs. This is actually physically what's there and what you're going to be having to manage on an ongoing basis. You want to have a comprehensive amount of information there. And you might even just have a way of letting new people come into your properties, and then after the defects liability period, or DLP as some call it, you just might have a flick over into different contractors. You might say this is now out of this period, move across. But all of these need to be properly mandated and kind of understood. So, possibly I should have put the slide just after that, but I will now cumbersomely go back through. Okay, so that's the parts in the process where the data is required. So just wanted to make sure you really understand it's the business process where you want to start capturing your data and build and develop your data capture forms. It doesn't have to be anything too fancy. You can start with Excel. It's more important to get it effective than to be efficient or flash. There's no point investing a huge amount of time into workflowing something if you've got lots of different stakeholders saying, I want this, I want that. You might have somebody who says, I really need this for energy efficiency because we can bid for stuff. 6 months down the line, they haven't used any of that information. You see they haven't requested any reports, they haven't accessed or utilised that. If you challenge them on it, they might say, well, actually, I need this for 2 years down the line. Okay, fine. But you just kind of understand what is a true need that someone's talking about, and what is a want. So if you could use a Moscow kind of analysis on that. Then revise, review, repeat. So that review process, you want to make sure that the control is working before you workflow it, before you make it as easy as possible to use, because there's no point having a control which people aren't happy with, which isn't capturing the right aspects, and then trying to make that better. You want to make it comprehensive enough that everyone's happy with what it's capturing, and then make it do its job better. And then repeat to your next bigger process. So if you start with new build, perhaps stock transfers, leaving the business is another big thing that you're doing to fund your new build programs. You might want to look at, right, how does that information change? What is the conveyancing process out of our business? Who gets involved? When does the company secretary sign? When does the relevant director sign off on this? Where does the information need to change? Where's that actual exchange happened? And that's essentially how you need to look at the property life cycle. So that's bringing us to a close on this talk, but hopefully it's given everyone a bit more of a feel around how the property life cycle works, where and how you want to be looking at controlling those aspects, and the fact it is a very valid business driver to get this right, because it affects so many things. By not having your data controlled and captured at the right times, the right places, so you have all of it properly working, you cannot have self-service, you cannot have a great amount of automation. You're going to have people not trusting your information, not making decisions off their information because there's that lack of trust. And that's pretty much it. So thank you all very much. So if you have any questions or comments, I'll be very, very interested.
You've kind of got the idea that data is an issue and managing the life cycle is quite important. I've seen an organisation where actually they are capturing the data, but they're capturing the data at the wrong point. Where new property comes in, it's actually not the development team creating the records, it's actually the rents team probably creating. So again, it's about who is creating the data in the right place. Because if it's a rents team can actually know I'll create the basic address and I'll put the basic rent information which I need for my side of the business to run, but why do I care about what the repairs team needs?
Yeah.
So I think and this kind of helps, and actually the role and responsibility might be a good kind of addition to say, right, how do you actually manage this?
But you're absolutely right, it's about who owns the data, how's the data being governed. There are huge amounts of focus areas for people. Actually, that was what came out in the first session that we had, was that the number one thing that people wanted to understand was how do you establish data ownership.
Yeah.
The next one followed down was looking at data quality and data governance as areas. So we're probably going to match that up into a session in itself, looking at specifically how do you have that responsibility, what is the data steward, what is the data owner, and looking at how you actually put that into practice.
Yeah, and I think data is becoming very important now, given the sectors under so much pressure to actually deliver more with less. The sector efficiency targets now being set actually are now pushing people to kind of minimize it. The easiest way people see minimizing costs is actually cutting people. Traditionally, what people do is you look at what the easiest roles we can actually cut is data administrators, because you can roll it up into someone else's role, and that person who gets the additional task is actually, I don't have time for this, and then quality then just tends to fall off.
Well, it's short-term gain for longer-term, lots of pain.
Yeah.
Because someone who's wearing too many hats will not be able to do any of their jobs that well, and it's very important to get your information right. But that's where the monitoring system comes into play. So if you have a comprehensive monitoring system of your data quality, if you start taking headcount down, you actually see, okay, our data quality is actually dropping. We're not doing it as quickly as possible. So we lose money, we lose revenue through every process where we're slow, because perhaps we miss a week's rent. Perhaps we don't do everything we should be doing. We're not capturing all our ownership of our properties. We're not doing the repairs in the right way, so we've got a legal challenge. all of those kind of instances. But having that monitoring system helps give that awareness to the organisation. So if they do make that decision, perhaps they need to reverse the decision if they have that in place. But it's very easy to make that decision if you don't have that awareness. Think, well, it's not an important one.
And I think it's one of the things that we don't really monitor within the sector is the whole sector is currently going through transformation, lean and all of that, but what we're not looking at is all the service failures that we are getting poor data. Because when we do a service failure, repairs for some reason, we haven't repaired something, people generally say, actually it's the organisation hasn't done it. But the root cause potentially could be that actually we didn't have the right data to make a decision.
Yeah.
And that kind of is the lost in the translation part, because often enough the brainstorm starts, contractor didn't do it, let's try and push them to actually get it fixed, or we'll kind of compensate the customer, and that's the end of it.
Yeah.
But that root cause analysis is never done.
The other classic example of gas servicing. It's often a regulatory breach, and it's often because you missed out the data somewhere along the line. That either the asset required it or that the service was due.
Gas is the classic, it's the one scary unknown that whilst you might have your full stock list, how many boilers, what type of boiler do we have? It's a scary thought. People are probably 99% aware, and not enough that no matter how many times you actually go and actually survey, there's still the odd property you keep finding that actually has got gas.
Well, the underlying challenge there is people go off and survey against this list of their assets which they have, but nobody ever fundamentally challenges that list. Says, is that list complete? But what about those contracts there, those care and support contracts, or what about that regional office which has a local database or local spreadsheet? So you're basing it on the assumption that this one list you have is actually correct. So all things are funneled through that one piece of kind of information which you're using. If you challenge that and say, actually, no, there are several properties which aren't properly recorded, or some of them have boilers, it completely undermines the full level of compliance which organisations kind of say we are 99.98% compliant. You can't have that without having that underlying confidence.
Yeah. And I think it's the whole historical idea that there's good data, there's bad data, and then there's housing data. And I think it's how do you get out of that mindset of that from housing data? I think we actually need to even at least get to the bad data state itself.
Well, that's kind of what we're trying to drive the whole sector towards, being much more data-driven with how they work. It's kind of getting that message across, because it is so important to get this right. Having the data controls, having your information stacked up, because self-service saves a huge amount of money for organisations. If the root cause is generally poor data behind lots of aspects, having that stacked up will lead to lots of savings down the line. Just you won't necessarily get immediate savings, but you will get stacked up business improvements. It's just having that kind of mindset shift that we want to longer term focus on improving our business. That's where things like Kaizen, like continuous improvement mindsets set in. You need much longer term focus. Let's focus our resources onto this, let's get this problem solved, and actually it will pay dividends down the road, because our information will be so sleek. People won't be talking about housing data as a kind of basket case. You'll say, housing data, you need to go and check out how things work in housing. It's brilliant. A few years away from that, but that's the kind of vision behind where we get to. Cool.
You've actually focused on the property lifecycle.
Yeah.
I think what you could do is actually change it to data lifecycle in housing. Because the model and concept is still the same, whether it's a property, whether it's a tenancy, whether it's a customer. The concept is still the same. And then as organizations are now kind of venturing into employment services and trying to encourage people into employment, you still have that data lifecycle issue that needs to be solved. I mean, if you ask organizations how many people do you put through employment, they'll have a number. But then you ask them how many of them are actually repeat people, they'll say, actually I don't know. So it's then kind of saying that the whole concept around create, change, and then go to destroy the data. I think you can use it in any kind of data kind of entity itself.
But it becomes more pertinent with GDPR, because you need to end your data at certain points. So this data is only valid for this period. After that, you need to look at how you're going to
Yes.
remove it or extinguish it somehow. So you're absolutely right.